guys, it's me, Dr. George. Many of you know me by Belinda George. I'm putting my personal phone on Do Not Disturb, and I have a continuation of the fairy tale books. So, welcome to Tucked In Tuesdays. I'm so glad that you joined me tonight. If you don't get to watch it now or later, just know that if you're not watching it while I'm answering questions or saying your name, you missed a live. I have a couple of people that come on after, and I appreciate that. I try to get to those comments. So tonight we'll have Read to Me Book of Fairy Tales. We have several stories to read from this book, written and illustrated by Michael Hague and permission granted by Harper Collins. Tonight we'll be reading Jack and the Beanstalk is the very first one that we will be reading. And he said, hi, Mike. He said, hello, dinosaur. Hello, Mike. Hello, Miss Bridges. How are you? So last week we read Beauty and the Beast and Cinderella. And this is something that they don't really read in schools anymore. But this is how we learned a lot of the differences between fiction and nonfiction. So let's get right into Jack and the Beanstalk. And there are different variations to the story. So sometimes you see them and they're a little bit different, or the pictures are different. So here goes. Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack and his mother lived on a farm that had been facing recent hardship. A drought had wiped out their crop for the summer and left them with no food to eat or sell. Take our cow and see what you can fetch for it, his mother said. But mother, without the cow, we will have nothing left, Jack said. But they were desperate. The cow was the last chance for them to get any money. As Jack led his cow to the market, a beggar passed by. So there we have, that's that Beanstalk. And Mike said, I learned the fairy tale by watching Disney's. That's true. Hi, Tony McPherson. Hi, Rolanda. Hi, Raleigh. Hi, Linda. How are you? Linda, tell Johnny I said hello. A beggar passed by them. Jack looked forlorn, and desperate. And this gave the beggar an idea. I'm interested in buying her, the beggar said. How much money can you offer? Jack asked, his face brightening. Perhaps this man could be your saving grace. I don't have money, but I do have these magic beans, the beggar said. They will give you all the riches you can ever imagine. Jack couldn't believe his luck. He knew his mother would be very proud at his bargaining skills. It was one thing to get money for the cow that they would quickly spend, but these beans would guarantee them money for life. But when Jack's mother saw the beans, she was furious. You fools, she cried. Now we have nothing. Now we are going to starve to death. She grabbed the beans from Jack and threw them out the window. Jack went to bed feeling guilty and with his stomach rumbling. Or was that rumbling coming from outside? The next morning, there was a huge beanstalk growing in their garden. It was thicker than any great tree and so tall that it reached higher than the clouds. I'm going up there to explore, Jack told his mother. No, Jack, it looks dangerous, she said. Jack wanted to set things right. Against his mother's wishes, he scaled the beanstalk into the clouds. Higher and higher he climbed until his house was just a speck below. At the top of the beanstalk, there was a house, more grand and prominent than anything Jack had ever seen before. Jack peeked through the window and spotted a loaf of bread on the table. Seeing no one nearby, he tiptoed inside and took a bite. Who are you? A voice said from behind. He spun around and came face to face with a very beautiful and very tall woman. I'm sorry, but I've traveled very far and I just needed a small bite of bread, Jack said. He hoped that this woman might have pity on him. Jack was in luck. The woman did want to help him. She sliced off a chunk of bread and gave him some cheese. Take this and hide, she said. Hide? My husband is a terrible giant. He eats boys like you. Just then the ground shook as the giant's footsteps came closer. Hurry, into the oven. Jack did as he was told. He jumped into the oven and watched through the vent in the back. The front door burst open and a giant ducked his head as he stepped inside. Fee, fi, fo, fum, he bellowed. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Don't be silly, his wife said. It's only the meat I'm cooking for dinner. Jack watched as the giant sat at the table and feasted on the biggest steak he'd ever seen. The giant then gobbled up a whole loaf of bread and had several glasses of wine. After all the food was gone from the table, the giant looked restless. Wife, bring me my goose, he said. His wife gave him a lovely white goose. On the giant's command, hi, David. On the giant's command, the goose began laying eggs, but these were no ordinary eggs. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. These eggs were solid gold. When the giant grew bored, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Soon the room was filled with the sound of snoring loud enough to shake the whole house. Jack quietly lifted himself out of the oven. He was going to make a run for the door, but those golden eggs tempted him. Instead, he climbed up the table and grabbed the goose. Jack carefully and quietly made his way to the front door. Once he was outside, he ran as fast as possible toward the beanstalk. The goose began to squawk and flap her wings, but Jack was able to make it home safely. Back in his little farmhouse, the mother looked doubtfully at the goose. Just wait, he said. Then he told the goose to lay her, and there's the beast coming in, giant, to lay her eggs. And when she did, they had a whole basket full of solid gold eggs. These eggs would fetch enough money to keep them comfortable and well fed for life. Months passed. Jack was happy to have a full belly and not to have to worry about money anymore, but he couldn't stop thinking about the giant. What other magical things did he have that could make Jack rich? Without asking his mother's permission, he set off one day up the beanstalk. Through the window, he saw the giant's wife alone in the kitchen. How dare you show your face here, she said. My husband is distraught over losing that goose. Before Jack could argue, hi, Sarah, he heard the familiar pounding of approaching footsteps. Quick, in the cupboard, she said. Fee, fi, fo, fum, the giant bellowed. I smell the blood of an Englishman. Don't be silly, his wife said. It's only the meat I'm cooking for dinner. Once again, the giant devoured the feast in front of him. After dinner, he asked his wife to bring him his satchel of gold coins. He counted them and put them in the stacks until he grew bored and fell asleep. Before the wife could stop him, Jack came out of hiding and climbed up on the table. He put the satchel of gold coins over his shoulder and ran. His mother was furious with him for sneaking out. When she saw the gold coins and was pleased. But then she saw the gold coins and was pleased. The coins were enough to buy them a bigger house and fine clothes to wear. They would never have to farm again. This time, 3 years passed before Jack had the urge to climb the beanstalk again. Golden eggs and gold coins. What else was the giant hiding? Up the beanstalk he went. He walked cockier and a little more confidently now. He was no longer that desperate, hungry boy who had tried to take the giant's bread. This time, when he sneaked inside the giant's house, no one was home. He took his time looking in cabinets and closets to find the giant's treasures. Then he heard the thump, thump of the giant's footsteps. Quickly, he jumped into a nearby wash basin and covered himself with soapy water. The giant couldn't smell him this time now that he was covered in soap. Jack watched as the giant's wife fixed him dinner, and he ate and ate until he couldn't fit any more food in his great big belly. Wife, bring me my harp, he said. The giant's wife carried a golden harp to the table. The giant looked pleased. Much to Jack's surprise, instead of playing it, the giant commanded it to play. It sang the loveliest song Jack had ever heard. The song was so soothing that quickly the giant fell asleep and his snores reverberated throughout the house. Jack crawled out of the tub and shook himself dry. He climbed up the table and took the singing harp under his arm. Surely a magical harp like this would make him the richest man in his town. When Jack reached the front door, the harp song stopped. Afraid that this might wake up the giant, Jack began to run. The harp started to shout. Help, it yelled. This tiny man is stealing me. The giant woke up with a start, just in time to see Jack and the harp through the doorway. Jack ran with the harp and didn't look back. The rumble of the clouds was enough for him to know that the giant was close behind. He reached the beanstalk and began climbing down with the harp crying in his ear and the giant getting closer. When he reached the bottom, he called to his mother, Quick, give me an axe. Jack chopped at the beanstalk until it started to tip over. Push, he said. The beanstalk toppled over with the giant on it. He crashed to his death in the fields nearby. Jack's mother hugged him, happy that he was safe. He was content and wealthy for the rest of his days, glad never to see a beanstalk again. And there's the giant. Well, this story, as the kid says, hits a little different when you're older, because when I was much younger, I thought that this is my opinion, I thought that the giant was the bad guy, but the giant was in his home upstairs. Jack was actually the bad guy. Sometimes we want things and we go about getting them the wrong way. You never have to knock somebody else down to get what you want. You don't. You don't have to make anybody look smaller or worse than you to get what you want. You just have to work for it just as hard as they're working for it. But what Jack did is he went out, he got the beans, and he grew the beans. Teresa Hanks said, exactly. You're right, Teresa. I agree. And Jack grew through the beans. He believed in the beans. He threw the beans. So he had faith. And he climbed it up. He was greedy. The first time he got the goose, the golden eggs, that wasn't enough. Then he went back and he got the, what do you get? The satchel of coins. Then he went back and took the harp. And then he chopped down the beanstalk and got rid of the giant. Now, up in the sky, the wife, Jack ruined a lot. I tell you, you live a little bit and things change from when you were a child. I can't wait to do my greed indeed. Yes, Rochelle, greed indeed. So now the Little Mermaid. Let's see how this changes. So I'm about to read the Little Mermaid, and then I'm going to give you my takeaways from each one. I pretty much gave it to you with Jack and the Beanstalk. The Little Mermaid. Deep below the ocean, the surface of the ocean, there lived a mere king and a mere queen who had 6 daughters. When each of the young mermaids turned 15, their parents permitted them to swim to the surface and see the world. Little Mermaid was the youngest of the daughters, and each year she enviously waited for her to turn to see the world above the surface. Finally, her 15th birthday arrived. The Little Mermaid anxiously swam to the surface and took her fresh breath of air. That night, and here she is. So she looks different than the Disney mermaid. So that night was particularly stormy, and the Little Mermaid struggled to keep her head above the surface as the waves washed around her. Just when she was ready to end her adventure and return to her home below the sea, she saw a large ship being tossed violently by the waves. The little Mermaid swam closer, and there among the wreckage, a handsome human lay unconscious across a broken piece of ship. And I stopped reading for a second because she has fins under her arms and on her back. The mermaids that we see on Disney don't have anything like that. Hi, Johnny. Hi, Angelique. Hi, Malachi. There were no other humans in sight. The Little Mermaid knew that if she didn't help him, he would not survive. Swimming further away than she ever had before, the Little Mermaid carried the handsome human to shore. As he looked into her eyes, as she looked into his eyes, she couldn't help but fall in love. That's right, Teresa, learning is living. When the sun came up that morning, the human began to open his eyes. The Little Mermaid smiled at him but before she could speak, she heard someone coming down the beach. Quickly, she jumped back into the ocean and hid underwater. A beautiful maiden approached the human on the beach. "My dear prince, is that you?" She took his hand in hers. "A prince?" The Little Mermaid had fallen in love with a prince. "You?" the prince sputtered. "You saved me." The princess smiled, didn't correct him, and helped him back to the palace. The Little Mermaid knew she couldn't live underwater while her love was walking on land. She needed a way to get on shore and tell the prince that she was the one who saved him. She sought out the sea witch and begged her to turn her into a human. "On one condition, Little Mermaid," the sea witch said. "In exchange for a pair of legs, you'll have to give me your voice." Surely the prince would recognize her right away, with or without her voice. He would know she was his true love, the one who had rescued him from the wreckage. "One more thing," the sea witch said. "The prince must choose you as his bride. If he doesn't, you will turn into sea foam." The Little Mermaid agreed. The next thing she knew, she was thrust onto the beach, her fins replaced with clumsy legs and no way to call for help. A servant from the palace found her and helped her inside. When she was presented to the prince, he didn't remember her. Yet he was enthralled by her beauty. He volunteered to show the Little Mermaid around the city. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized that he loved the maiden who he believed rescued him, and not this quiet, clumsy girl. This Little Mermaid continued to fall in love, but the prince wanted no one except the maiden. On their wedding day, the Little Mermaid waited, grieving at the thought of becoming sea foam. The sea witch approached her on the beach. The Little Mermaid wanted to beg for her fins back. She knew she had made a mistake. But of course, the Little Mermaid couldn't speak. All she could do was weep. We've all been there before. My dear, stop your crying. I have just the thing to make everything better. The sea witch said, I'll offer you another deal. If you use this dagger to kill your prince, I will let you return to the sea with your fins restored. She left the dagger at Little Mermaid's feet and disappeared into the water. The Little Mermaid wanted nothing more than to return home to the Mirror King and Mirror Queen and her sisters. She hid the dagger and walked back to the palace. That night, when the prince was sound asleep, she sneaked into his bedroom. She stood over him as he slept. She felt the weight of the dagger in her hands, but the prince looked so happy and peaceful. The Little Mermaid knew she couldn't go through with it. She softly kissed the prince's cheek goodbye and fled the palace for the ocean to await her fate. Instead of becoming sea foam, because of her kindness, the witch transformed the Little Mermaid into a spirit of the air. She once swam in the sea as a mermaid and walked on the land on two legs, and now she could float forever among the clouds. Well, that's not what I remember as a kid, but there it is. Everybody's story has a little twist on it. It's definitely not Disney story, but the mermaid in this one, because she did something for somebody, she thought they owed her something in return. And he didn't. When you do something kind for someone, they don't owe you anything in return. They don't owe you anything. You do it because it makes you feel good. And it makes the other person feel good, but they don't owe you anything. So my takeaway from Jack and the Beanstalk is sometimes you just have to be happy with the blessings that you have and trust that more will come. And with the Little Mermaid, my takeaway is sometimes the things we love don't love us back, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't stop. We should stop being kind and stop loving. Those are my two takeaways. I'll be here next week with two more stories. It'll be Little Red Riding Hood and The Nightingale. So those are your two fairy tales. Thank you guys for joining me. Remember, if nobody else tells you, Dr. George loves you. I'll see you guys next week. Bye-bye.